الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا من يهده الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلل فلا هادي له وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله صلى الله عليه وعلى آله وأصحابه ومن تبعهم بإحسان إلى يوم الدين أما بعد. So today inshallah ta'ala we'll be continuing our study in the book Al-Arba'in An-Nawawiyya, and in the last session that we had, that we have covered in several sessions the last hadith, which is hadith the 31st hadith, and today inshallah ta'ala we'll be starting a new hadith with hadith ثاني وثلاثون. So it will be the 32nd hadith in this particular series of An-Nawawi rahimahullah ta'ala. So as the normal method that we approach, or the normal approach, that the hadith will be read, and then we'll go through discussing the hadith, and we'll outline regarding the different areas that we'll cover in explaining this hadith. So first we have the hadith read, and then with the translation, and then we'll go through the hadith بأمر الله سبحانه وتعالى. أيوة.
بسم الله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله. Hadith number 32. Do not harm and do not be a cause of harm. عن أبي سعيد سعد بن مالك بن سنان الخدري رضي الله تعالى عنه أن رسول الله صلى الله عليه وآله وسلم قال: لا ضرر ولا ضرار. حديث حسن رواه ابن ماجه والدارقطني وغيرهما مسندا. ورواه مالك في موطأ مرسلا عن عمرو بن يحيى عن أبيه عن النبي صلى الله عليه وآله وسلم فأسقط أبا سعيد وله طرق يقوي بعضها بعضا. On the authority of Abu Sa'id Sa'd ibn Malik ibn Sinan al-Khudri radiallahu anh, that the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam said, do not harm and do not be a cause of harm. Hadith Hasan, related by Ibn Majah and Daraqutni, and other than them, Musnadan. Is related by Imam Malik in Al-Muwatta Mursalan on Amr ibn Yahya on his father, on the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So Abu Sa'id is omitted from the chain. It also has other narrations that strengthen each other.
So those are the hadith I will be covering today, or starting to cover today inshallah ta'ala. So the others, as I mentioned, are the hadith read and Abu Sa'id al-Khudri radiyallahu anhu. So in this particular, in my book of Ibn Rajab, that he mentioned, and Abu Sa'id al-Khudri radiyallahu anhu, and Nabi alayhi salam qala, and he mentioned the hadith. So that normally that you find that An-Nawawi rahimahullah ta'ala, whenever he mentioned the Sahabi the first time, that he'll mention him by his full name. So he mentioned an Abi Sa'id Sa'd ibn Malik ibn Sinan al-Khudri. But in some of the explanation, there's no mention of the full name of the Sahabi, the Rawi of Hadith. But we'll discuss that matter further beyond Allah inshallah ta'ala. So as for the Hadith that is mentioned, that they mention La darar wa la dirar. So the Hadith, very few wordings, La darar wa la dirar. And he mentioned Hadithun Hasanun. So that's kind of somewhat explain the grading of the Hadith. They will mention Hadith Hasan before, or discuss this matter, or recall. Okay. So that matter. So then he mentioned Rawahu Ibn Majah wa Daraqutni wa ghayruhuma musnadan wa rawahu Malik fi Muwatta an Amr ibn Yahya an Nabi alayhi salam mursalan wa asqata Aba Sa'id wa lahu turuq yaqwa ba'daha bi ba'd. So that's the hadith that they mentioned here, and also he mentioned certain things regarding some of the discussion regarding this particular hadith, regarding matters relating to the isnad of the hadith. So as for what will normally, our method is that first we'll mention something regarding the hadith, and what is mentioned regarding the hukm upon the hadith. So he mentioned an Abu Sa'id al-Khudri with the hadith upon him. Then he mentioned, as for the part that we discuss regarding this particular hadith. So the hadith is well known to most. La darar wa la dirar. So as for the hadith, he mentioned Hadithun Hasan, given in clarifying the grading of the hadith. Then he mentioned Rawahu Ibn Majah. So by way of the ulama called At-Takhrij, Ilmu Takhrij, they will mention some of the sources of this hadith. So of those things that is mentioned by Ibn Rajab and others, that regarding aspect of the hadith by way of hadithiyah, matter that relates to ilm al-hadith, that when they mentioned that the author, now rahimahullah ta'ala, when they mentioned that, that mentioned hadith, he says that hadith in the where the hadith collected by Ibn Majah wa Daraqutni. Aywa. So he mentioned that Ibn Rajab and others have mentioned that hadith Abu Sa'id, this hadith of Abu Sa'id al-Khudri radhiyallahu anhu, lam yukharrijahu Ibn Majah. So this hadith is not actually with Ibn Majah. Nam. So in the book regards to that Ibn Majah, the hadith in reality is not this narration of Abu Sa'id al-Khudri is not mentioned by Ibn Majah. It is not mentioned by Ibn Majah. So that's an error by way of takhrij of the hadith. Then I mentioned that, as he mentioned that, as for the source of this hadith with this narration, with this particular Sahabi, they mentioned this hadith of Abu Sa'id. It is in the Ad-Daraqutni, Al-Hakim in his Mustadrak, and Bayhaqi. So they mentioned regarding this hadith, so that's concerned with the hadith. There's an error have occurred regarding where he cited the hadith or referenced the hadith back to Ibn Majah and Daraqutni, but in reality this hadith with going back to Abu Sa'id al-Khudri is not found in Ibn Majah. Clear regarding that? Mm-hmm. So certain of time that ulama hadith that of things they can be very precise regarding of what checking that the reference for the hadith is correct and the sources that I mentioned are actually correct. But they have mentioned regarding concerning this particular hadith that when they mentioned hadithun Hasan, and he went on to mention regarding lahu turuq, that the asl of this hadith, this particular hadith, that it is considered to be weak. This hadith is considered to be weak, but when it is with other hadith, it gives strength, according to what is mentioned here. So the hadith on its own, and also the other narration of this hadith, that they are weak. So you'll find that they have mentioned that, as we'll discuss, that this hadith, though it can be found by, they said to have different shawahid wa mutabaat. So the ulama hadith, that they have of the aspect of ilm al-hadith, where they will try to find other narrations of hadith, and also other isnad, other turuq, other chains, to see at times that it outline whether there's an error that have occurred, and also at times whether those different shawahid, which is, she will explain shawahid wa mutabaat, that it may give strength to each other. So meaning that the hadith at times, hadith that is being looked at, it on its own, it is weak. Like this hadith. Mm-hmm. This hadith, it is weak on its own. So the khilaf between the ulama, whether this hadith, a difference between the ulama, whether this particular hadith, la darar wa la dirar, that whether the hadith is marfu' or muttasil or mursal. Nam. So muttasil, it has a proper chain, a full connected chain, going back to the Prophet ﷺ, or the hadith that has a break, that is a break in the isnad. So that's the discussion between that, as we'll discuss this matter. So as for this particular hadith, that you'll find several of the Sahaba who have narrated this particular hadith. So several of the Sahaba who have narrated this particular hadith. Amongst those who have narrated the hadith, we have the narration of Abu Sa'id al-Khudri, the one mentioned here. And this particular narration that is mentioned here, so they mentioned that this narration of Abu Sa'id al-Khudri, that there are some ziyadat in some of the narration, but there's a discussion regarding one of the narrators who's in this isnad of this hadith of Abu Sa'id al-Khudri, that our narrator name is Uthman ibn Muhammad ibn Uthman ibn Rabi'ah, and he's somewhat he's under discussion. So the ulama mentioned he's da'if. So you have Uthman ibn Muhammad ibn Uthman ibn Rabi'ah ibn Abi Abdul Rahman, that is said to be da'if. So the ulama, Ad-Daraqutni, Abdul Haq al-Ishbili, and others who have all him to be someone who's da'if. All him to be a narrator who's da'if. But then we mentioned that Al-Hakim, in his book Al-Mustadrak, when he mentioned this particular hadith, that he mentioned هذا hadithun sahihun isnad ala shart Muslim. So Al-Hakim, in his book Al-Mustadrak, when he mentioned this particular hadith of Abu Sa'id al-Khudri, he stated هذا hadithun sahihun al-isnad ala shart Muslim, that this hadith, it is authentic. That's the ruling of Al-Hakim. The hadith, it is authentic, and the isnad is according to condition of Imam Muslim. Then they mentioned that, and this is not the case of those who have mentioned that even though it is stated by the Hakim, that's the case, but that's not the reality. That's not the reality. The hadith is not according to the condition of Imam Muslim or the Isnad. So you have that matter regarding that narration of the hadith. Also, you'll find that this particular hadith also, there's a narration of this hadith on Ibn Abbas. So you have Ibn Abbas. So you find that even Ibn Rajab rahimahullah ta'ala have mentioned others who have narrated this hadith. So of those, he mentioned, so the narration that goes back to it, before the narration goes back to Ibn Majah. The narration that goes back to Ibn Majah, that particular hadith, that's the hadith, is actually the hadith of Ubadah ibn Samit. So the narration that is found with Ibn Majah, that hadith does not go back to Abu Sa'id al-Khudri, rather it goes back to Ubadah ibn Samit. So the hadith of Ubadah ibn Samit, that's narration in the Ibn Majah. Nam, and that narration it goes that فقال أن رسول الله عليه السلام قضى أن لا ضرر ولا ضرار. That the narration said the Prophet Islam that he ruled لا ضرر ولا ضرار. That the Prophet Islam made this judgment that there's no harm and no harm to be done. So that's concerning that particular hadith. Also this hadith that they mentioned in the Isnad في انقطاع, that منقطع, that there's انقطاع in that Isnad. And it is taken from a Sahifa. But overall, and also in the Isnad, another narrator is Ishaq ibn Yahya. Another of the narrators in this Isnad, Ishaq ibn Yahya. That is qeel, as for Ishaq ibn Yahya, that it is said that is Abu Talha, but he said to be da'if, and that he did not hear from Ibn Samit. Ubadah ibn Samit, he did not hear from him. So there's inqita in that Isnad, as stated by Abu Zur'a wa Abu Hatim al-Razi. Then also, that hadith, also it is, we have a narration of Ibn Abbas. So also this hadith, so these were considered to be, so we said we have, how many we mentioned so far? Abu Sa'id al-Khudri, as mentioned here by the author, rahimahullah ta'ala. Then we mentioned that there's another narration that goes back to another Sahabi, who's
Ibn Abbas.
Before that we said, Ubadah ibn Samit. So that's considered to be the account to the ulama of what now the practice today are called a shahid. According to the term, or the hadith terminology, that we consider to be a shahid. So shahid, so you have mutabat and you have shawahid. So which is a process called regarding concern this matter, that they call al-i'tibar, that in seeking other narration of a particular hadith. So trying to find other narration of hadith or other turuq, the process is called al-i'tibar. But meaning that a person tries to investigate and research other sources to see, are there other narration of this hadith, either from other companions or with other turuq, other chains. So these other narration from other Sahaba, it is called, they refer to it as mutabat. According to what now said now, what is now the practice now today, they call it al-mutabat, or they call it shawahid. But the ulama of all, they see shawahid wa mutabat as the same thing. The ulama of all, they see shawahid wa mutabat as the same thing. So general said that, so the shahid, we have the hadith of Ubadah ibn Samit. Also there's another shahid of this hadith of Abu Sa'id al-Khudri from Ibn Abbas, where it mentioned, is hadith it mentioned, that la darar wa la dirar. But in that narration, which is found, they mentioned also in Ibn Majah, that is also in the Ibn Majah, wa Daraqutni, but also in that narration, that there's a narrator called Jafir al-Ju'fi, da'afahu aktharun, that you find that many of the ulama of hadith, they hold him to be daif. So again, this other narration of Ibn Abbas, it is daif. So we have three hadith. So for all three, or that said, three different companions narrating the same hadith. So each are considered to be three separate hadith. With me? So hadith are counted by the Isnad, or by the Sahaba. So each separate Sahaba is considered to be a separate hadith, even though the meaning is same. So we have those three hadith that have been mentioned by the three Sahaba, and the hadith is said to be daif. Also there's another narration of the hadith of Aisha. So there's the fourth narration of this hadith on Aisha radiallahu anha. We also in our narration mentioned An-Nabi Islam قال لا ضرر ولا ضرار. But also in this narration you have Al-Waqidi. In the narration of Aisha, there's one narrator who's Al-Waqidi. So Waqidi rahimahullah ta'ala is famous for Sirah wal Maghazi, and he has a book on that topic. And he's in that field of Maghazi wa Sirah, is a specialist. He's reliable. But in Hadith narration, he's not. With me? So Al-Waqidi, I've mentioned this, and I mentioned, so Al-Waqidi, that his narration is daif. And also you have others. And also in this narration of Al-Waqidi, it is found in the Ad-Daraqutni wa Tabarani. Fifth narration of this hadith is an Jabir. The fifth narration is upon Jabir radiallahu anhu, أن النبي عليه السلام قال لا ضرر ولا ضرار في الإسلام. So the narration of Jabir, he mentioned لا ضرر ولا ضرار في الإسلام. And that narration is mentioned by Abu Dawood in his Marasil. So Abu Dawood as-Sijistani, he has a book. So you have more than one books. The Sunan that is more well known, but also Abu Dawood as-Sijistani, that he has a book called Al-Marasil. So this hadith is mentioned within that book, and it is mentioned with a Mursal Isnad. And also with this isnad also upon Jabir, it is narrated by At-Tabarani. So it's narrated by Tabarani and also Abu Dawood as-Sijistani and others. But the narration of Abu Dawood Marasil, it has a Mursal Isnad. Also again, you find the hadith is narrated on Mugan. So for how many we mentioned? 5. Another narrator is Abu Hurairah. So also have the narration of Abu Hurairah among the Sahaba who have narrated this hadith. That the Prophet ﷺ says, لا ضرر ولا ضرار الحديث. So that's of those, so that narration of Abu Hurairah radiallahu anhu, it is found in the Ad-Daraqutni. It is found in the Daraqutni. And in that narration you have Ibn Atta, one of the narrators, وهو يعقوب وهو ضعيف. So in this isnad, they mentioned هذا isnad فيه شك. There's some doubt in that isnad. And also وابن عطاء هو يعقوب وهو ضعيف. So this hadith and other narration of this hadith. So this particular hadith that it have been mentioned by several Sahaba, all of the isnad that have been mentioned is daif. All the narration of this hadith, it is daif. But as mentioned by, it is mentioned by Nawawi rahimahullah ta'ala, where mentioned فَأَسْقَطَ أَبَا سَعِيد, where they mention وَلَهُ تُرُقْ, that hadith have many turuq, have many chains, يَقْوَى بَعْضُهَا بِبَعْضٍ, that they cannot give strength to each other, and then the hadith will be elevated and considered to be Hasan. So you find hadith which is weak, or some more precise, some hadith that is said to be weak, but the weak is, the level of weakness is yasir, that they can be, the weakness is very slight. At times they can be added, which have many, multiple narration, could give strength to each other, and they're elevated to the grading of Hasan. So hadith, daif, multiple narrations that are somewhat slightness in weakness, if they're all added together, they give strength to each other, and the hadith is then considered to be graded as Hasan. Hasan li ghayri. So this hadith is fall in the category of hadith, as they mentioned, hadithun Hasan. Hadithun Hasan. So to the extent that even Ibn Rajab rahimahullah ta'ala also kind of somewhat went along with that hukum, and many others. So that's concerning that brief regarding that particular narration of that hadith. Brief regarding that particular hadith. Then they mention also the hadith in the Al-Muwatta. So you have this there, so they mention that of the narration which is musnada, meaning concerning of a complete isnad, going back to the Prophet ﷺ. Then also he mentioned mursala. So amongst, so he used two terminology. We got the ulama that use the word musnada wal mursala. طيب, he mentioned رواه ابن ماجه ودارقطني وغيرهما مسندا. Then I mentioned عن أبيه عن النبي الإسلام مرسلا. So you find that these two of terminology used by the ulama of hadith. Brothers are with me?
No.
Keeping up?
Yeah.
So you have musnada and mursala. Nam, again, terminology used by the ulama of hadith. Nam, so musnada, nam, at times, give the meaning of the hadith is like saying the hadith is that aba muttasil isnad upon going back to the Prophet ﷺ. So musnada, something you have different meaning of the word musnad. So of those meaning of the hadith, that it has a complete, it has a chain going back to the Prophet ﷺ that ends with the Prophet ﷺ, musnada. So like saying marfu'a. Nam, but with musnad, it has a complete chain going back to the Prophet ﷺ. And musnada, that means consider hadith, it ends with the Prophet ﷺ, and at times and narrated upon him by a sahaba. So you have different meanings given to musnada. Then also use the word that so some hadith, so some narration goes back to the Prophet ﷺ with a complete chain. Then also you have a next case regarding that, some narration it is what? Mursala. So what is mursal?
Going back to the companion.
Aywa. So as I said, it does mention, so mursala is as follows. Nam, so the ulama of hadith, so amongst the ulama of hadith, that what is defined as hadith al-mursal. Hadith mursal. So mursal linguistically have different meanings. Itlaq, adam al-man, so something that's let go. Nam, overall though, amongst the ulama of hadith, when we discuss concerning hadith al-mursal, that they have several definitions that are given. So hadith al-mursal have several definitions that are given. So of those definitions regarding hadith al-mursal, or what is put forward regarding hadith al-mursal, that they mention hadith al-mursal huwa ma rawahu at-tabi'i al-kabir an Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam. So that's one of the definition of al-mursal. So mursal is a narration ma rawahu at-tabi'i al-kabir, that when at-tabi'i kabir narrates upon the Prophet Islam, that's considered to be mursal. So in this case, so for this, with this definition, they kind of somewhat they restrict, or they kind of somewhat defined mursal as a narration from a kibar at-tabi'i, tabi'i kabir. So it's not a sahaba. So the tabi'i will be the student of the sahaba. So ordinarily, a tabi'i would not have seen the Prophet ﷺ, because their link would be between them and the Prophet ﷺ would be a sahaba. So a tabi'i would be at that generation that came, that the second generation. So you have the sahaba being the first generation, then the tabi'in would be the second generation. So ordinarily, a tabi'i would not see the Prophet ﷺ. You understand? So they so they would not narrate upon the Prophet ﷺ directly. But in this case, they mentioned that hadith al-mursal ma rawahu at-tabi'i al-kabir. So among the ulama, also the tabi'in, they put them in different categories. Kibar at-tabi'in, wasat awsat at-tabi'in, wa sigar at-tabi'in. With me, ikhwan? You're catching up? You have taken me, you have your books and with me? So among the tabi'i, they put them in different levels. Kibar, the senior ones, awsat, the medium level, and sigar, and the junior ones. So they mentioned here, so it's because they have that, they put them in those categories, that different ranking. So they mentioned here kibar. So anything of those, so the kibar or tabi'in, Sa'id al-Musayyib. So first, so for you to be considered the hadith that said to be mursal, then that narrator from the tabi'in, it must be from the kibar or tabi'in. That means that knowing over the kibar. But generally their definition, it takes that approach, that it's a narration from a senior tabi'i upon the Prophet ﷺ. But we said so that's concerning that the ulama criticized that definition regarding that that they think kind of somewhat, so some criticism on that, that the tabi'in in kibar, they do not rate upon a Prophet Islam, there's a level of, they say, sakt, a level of someone missing in the isnad, or some people missing in the isnad. The second definition of mursal, hadith al-mursal, ma rawa'u at-tabi'i mutlaqa. That the second definition is that a narration of a tabi'i upon a Prophet Islam without any tabi'i, whether from the junior, medium level, or senior. Any tabi'i that narrates upon a Prophet Islam is considered to be hadith mursal. So any tabi'i that narrates upon the Prophet Islam directly, then that narration is said to be mursal. Nam? So without making a distinction for the second view, do not make a distinction between kibar, awsat, and sighar, whether you're from the senior, medium, or junior level of the tabi'in. So any tabi'i that narrates upon a prophet, then your hadith is considered to be mursal. The third definition of al-mursal is what they mentioned regarding concerning ma hadith alladhi lam ya'tasil isnaduhu ala ayyi wajh kan min al-isnad. That al-mursal, the third definition, is that the isnad is not complete in any section of the in any part of the isnad. So that in the beginning of the isnad, or the center in the isnad, or the end of the isnad, wherever, if there's any breakage in the isnad from any section of hadith, it is mursal. With me? So any breakage in the isnad, or is not connected in the isnad at any section, so the section hadith will be the start, the center, or the end. That's the isnad. So anything, let's say, sakt that occur, then it is said to be mursal. And so that's concerning those definitions that's given regarding hadith al-mursal. So we gave three definitions. Now, the first is about the tabi al-kabir. The thing concerning the tabi, that in most cases, that you might find that between themselves, they will narrate upon each other. Sometimes you find that among the tabi'in, they might narrate one upon the other, even six of them narrate upon themselves. So you have levels amongst them. So not every tabi'i directly narrate upon the sahaba. Between him and the sahaba may be other tabi'i. Clear? So that means that there is people who may be missing that we are unaware of. So make that there's an breakage that occur in the isnad. They are sucked in the isnad. Also the second definition, is what? Ma rawahu at-tabi'i mutlaqa. So any tabi narrated upon a Prophet Islam, then that's said to be mursal. That's the definition now you find that is a more accepted definition, and that one that people kind of work with more today. At that definition you by the likes of Ibn Hajar al-Asqalani, so people can somewhat, so that's the one that is more, the one that is followed and applied today. That any tabi that narrates upon a Prophet Islam, then that is said to be hadith al-mursal, whether it's from the senior, junior, or medium level. That was said another standard that is followed and used today as the definition of mursal. And then the third definition, it does mean al-inqita. It was said, so you find that ulama of all, like we said, that Dawood as-Sajistani, so you have Dawood as-Sajistani in his book Al-Mursal, that is in print. That is book, you find that the ulama sometime of the past, the old scholars, Dawood as-Sajistani and the likes, when they use the word mursal, it carries a much more wider meaning than what is used by how it is used today. So when I use the word mursal, it will include al-inqita from any section of any portion anywhere in the isnad. So the word mursal for them is much more used more broader than how it became used, how it is now used, how it is used after. So the ulama of old, Dawood as-Sajistani, when they use the word mursal, it carries more broader, more general meaning than how it is used of those who came after them. Nam, even though you find most of the people, the fuqaha, that's concerning hadith al-mursal. So the standard or the meaning, the definition that is mainly used and understood today of contemporaries and latter day scholars is the second meaning, which is ma rawahu tabi'i,
no matter the level.
Sawa kana mutlaqa, upon the Prophet Islam. So any tabi that narrates upon the Prophet Islam at any level of being a tabi'i, it is considered to be mursal. That's now what is the understanding and how it's applied today. So the definition of al-mursal said the one that is more applied is the second definition. As for adas tambi, as they say, a caution that so you have books of mustalah, different books of, they say mustalah today, mustalah hadith, or books of ulumul hadith. So you have some, and yet they have different levels of those books. Like in every science, you have beginners, then you have intermediary, and you have advanced, and then you have specialists. Now, what are one of the renowned beginner texts for ilm al-hadith? What are the beginner texts?
He said al-ilm.
No, concerning mustalah al-hadith. What's the more like well-known beginner text? And a contemporary. Anyone. Beginners, I say anyone is a beginner, that more traditional, mutun, a more traditional one. Sorry? Huh? No, Nukhbatul Fikr, okay, that's one of them. Nukhbatul Fikr is not for beginners. Contrary to what people believe, it's not for beginners. So you find people who specialize in hadith, the ones who are known for this field, that they will say for a person that Nukhbatul Fikr wa Nuzha is not for beginners. Even though people have the mindset is for beginners. But it's not that the case. Another that you did last week. La Tadkura, Jade. That's Tadkura being another one, not that one. Another. Nazam. A Baykuniya. So this one, Al-Baykuniya, is of those Nazam, about 30 something, like lines in poetry regarding ilm al-hadith, mustalah al-hadith. So it's famous and used by many, something to start. And I said, a discussion between ulama, is it something to start with or not? The people who are like some of the specialists for hadith, they have their disagreement regarding it being used and being taught. You have some who have their reservation about it being used and being taught. Because of that, it doesn't, that the amount of what it contains regarding Imam Mustalah is very few. 30, very few. And also, that at times not very precise. And that's the point that, so in Baykuniya, and one, even the author is not known. The author of the book, Baykuniya, is not known. But the book is famous. Naam, ala kulli hal, and I have many explanations. But said Allahu Alam that for people in the West to start with it in the labas. For someone to start with Baykuniya in the West, but also be taught by a person who understands ilm al-hadith. Then labas. Because at times in Baykuniya, some of the definition that he mainly give definition is not that precise. And also give more so the mindset of the fuqaha, not al hadith. They give more in the line of the fuqaha and usuliyin as to their approach regarding ilm al-hadith, not per se the people of hadith. With me? So for example, I'll go into some of my books in Mustalah, rearrange them, and of the books that Dawood, the book that you just mentioned, the author that you just mentioned, and that you mentioned first. Who you mentioned first? La, before. Ibn Uthaymeen. So Ibn Uthaymeen have a shara of Nuzha, or something like that, or Nukhba, one of them, or something in al-hadith. Of the main books, I removed that book from the main books and put it somewhere else. Because Ibn Uthaymeen is not a specialist in hadith. You understand? And a person specialist in hadith, that wouldn't be a reference for them at all. For a person specialist in hadith, that book would not be a reference. Even though Ibn Sayyid rahimahullah ta'ala is an alim, but not in hadith and in mustalah. But he have taught it, but his book would not be used as a reference. With me? It seems.
Oh, listen, it's interesting.
You understand? So, Sheikh Al-Bani is different. But we say that, but we say that you might find that some of the ulama, that they may have works in other fields. But sometimes they are not, and yes, they work in other fields that they're not specialists in. Their books sometimes are not per se used as a main resource, because that's not their field. But they can discuss it, but they will even discuss it, they will not be as precise, and their example will not be the same with the people of hadith, because that's not their field. With me? So like a person who specializes in hadith, explaining something in usul al-fiqh. You with me? So like for example, a person who specializes in hadith, explaining a book in usul al-fiqh. That book, you understand, can have some benefit, but you may not use it as a main reference, because it's known to be hadith, but discussing something usul al-fiqh, and he maybe can give a general explanation, but his work would not be deemed to be a main resource in that field. With me? So that occurs. That occurs. So, some may disagree, what? Allah mustan wa alayhi tuklan. Ala kulli hal, in any science that you're doing in the beginning stages, go back to the people of that field. Especially concerned if you want to study mustalah, as they refer to as mustalah, ilm al-hadith, or usul al-fiqh, or usul al-tafsir, go back in those main science, go back to the people who are known for that science. He's known to be a specialist in that field. So you want to learn usul al-fiqh, don't just go back to anyone. Go back to a person who's what? A specialist in usul al-fiqh. Do you get me? You might not go to a person who's not known to be have some ilm, but he's not a specialist in that field, especially in the early stage of learning. Taib. Overall, that Baykuniya in his Manzuma that he mentioned regarding Hadith al-Mursal, that of the things he mentioned, that his definition, they say, fi khata. In his definition that he gives, that there's some caution regarding concern that he mentioned concerning that matter, regarding wal mursalun minhu as-sahabi saqat. Mursal anhu as-sahabi saqat. So if he said that definition mentioned that al-mursal is that narration where the sahabi is missing. Mursal is defined as narration going back to the Prophet ﷺ where the sahabi is not mentioned. Then if that's the case, the hadith is sahih, the hadith is muttasil. Because sahabi is al udul. So if we believe that only the sahabi is missing, then the hadith generally, then that hadith is considered to be somewhat, then that sahabi that is not known to us but it is known, then that hadith is considered to be hadith which is muttasil, because you know that the sahabi is missing. You with me?
So would that make it daif?
For other reasons. But the hadith concerns also, but the definition is the point is that the definition is not precise. Because if he's saying that a mursal hadith is one where the sahabi is not known, then that's not a problem for the people of hadith. So if he said the sahabi is not known, that we know the sahabi is the only one that is missing, then that we can overlook, that can be overlooked. Because all the sahabi are said to be udul. So if we know the isnad, the only person that is missing is sahabi, then that does not, is a major harm to the hadith.
It's not a major harm.
With other factors, so that, as I said, the general thing, the isnad, but considered so that he mentioned that he missed just the sahabi name, and we know the sahabi is missing, then that's not something considered to be a major deficiency from what is apparent, unless there's other reasons. So that, but the Shaykh not mentioning the Sahabi, then that's not a major defect on its own, by itself. Clear? So that definition I mentioned, no, that definition is somewhat unacceptable. Is that definition? It doesn't meet the standard of what would be considered for the hadith to be completely disregarded. If the Sahabi is not known, because verifying the Sahaba, then that the Sahaba generally are deemed to be udul. So their narration, if they're not mentioned by name, by mention, قال رجل من الصحابة, then that's sufficient. But that's the next matter. All the brothers are not confused. Confused somewhat.
Yeah. He lost it, yeah.
Hey, leave that then. Erase that bit. Erase that bit. That's more technical matters, as seems. But general concern about the shahid that what Baykuni rahimahullah ta'ala mentioned, that is definition of mursal is not precise. We mentioned that if the only one that is missing is Sahaba, then so if we said in a definition of hadith al-mursal is that the one that is missing is Sahabi, then that's not a major problem on its own. Because a Sahabi, generally, if not is missing, then it's not generally, it is complete. If we know for a fact that the only one that is missing is Sahaba, then generally you're saying that we have a complete isnad.
Because we know the adala.
Because the Sahabi, generally, if you know the only one that is missing is Sahaba, we know if that's the case, then when generally Sahaba, they are said to be what? Udul, credible, trustworthy. Nam? So by then, we can say the hadith still, it is something that can be looked at. And there's no sakt in the isnad.
It's the right word, adul.
And it can be udul. Udul, that they are credible. But that's just that matter. The next matter regarding the next matter regarding hadith al-mursal. So that one, but that's regarding, so mursal hadith is hadith where there's a sakt. Mursal hadith meaning that there's a sakt in isnad, that there's a breakage in isnad by way of from the jihatul tabi'i and those that come after. So hadith al-mursal is that there's a breakage in the isnad by the end of the isnad, where from the side of the tabi'i and those that follows after tabi'i. So by this hadith al-mursal, ulama hadith can say hadith al-daif. So hadith mursal with the ulama hadith is considered to be one of the types of hadith that are considered to be daif, weak. And that, as not mentioned, is not, that's called jamahir ulama al-hadith. Hadith al-mursal min hadith aqsam hadith al-daif. And Imam Muslim rahimahullah ta'ala in his muqaddimah and sahih kind of somewhat emphasize this point. The hadith al-mursal in the ulama al-hadith, hadith daif la hujjah. With me? So by way of the ulama of hadith, they will consider when a hadith is said to be mursal, then the hadith is considered to be is classed as a hadith which is daif. The reason why it's considered to be daif because he is sakt. But because the reason why it's said to be daif, because there's narrators that are missing, that we don't know of. So that's the reason it is considered to be daif. So those people that are missing, one cannot grade them to know whether they are trustworthy or not. So because of that, the hadith then is considered to be daif with the ulama of hadith.
Oh, sure.
Tabi'in, if it's proven that the Tabi'in met the Sahaba, but in the narration there are some people who are da'if, with the hadith still be considered as mursal.
So in the isnad, that particular tabi'i, he met a sahaba.
Maybe his teacher, for example.
Aye.
But some other people, there's discussion about them that this person is a weak narrator. So
Who's the weak narrator? Who's the weak narrator? Other people in isnad?
None.
Okay. So you have a hadith, a isnad, a sahabi, a tabi'i who have met a sahaba, Sa'id bin Musayyib. I've met Abu Hurairah and narrates upon him. Nam. But other people in the isnad, they're daif. Okay.
da'if for like basically.
And then that he said, with that formula, with that tariq, then hadith we said, if you have other narrators before the tabi'i who's weak, then hadith considered to be da'if due to those other people. So each person is looked at individually. Each person, the isnad, is looked at individually to see, you understand, certain checks, as they say, regarding the individual, which is his hifz and his adala. Nam, and also ittisal, to see did he meet the person and receive that hadith from him. You understand? So if all those checks and balances are in place, then hadith is considered to be sahih. If all those checks and balances are not in place, we find out that one of the narrators may be himself weak. Then that will have an impact with a hadith that is not considered to be da'if. Clear? I think. Hadiths and usul al-fiqh are more, requires a lot of concentration, a lot of effort. They are more complex, but two needed science. Ilm al-hadith, mustalah, and usul al-fiqh needed, but at times seems more complex, but needed. Next matter regarding hadith al-mursal, hujjiyat hadith al-mursal. So the hadith al-mursal, that you find that between the fuqaha, that they discuss regarding hadith al-mursal. So you might find the next example, say, hadith mursal, maybe the method hadith al-mursal bisanadun sahih. That hadith is mursal, but rijaluhu thiqat. They might say this, hadith al-mursal, wa rijaluhu thiqat. The hadith is mursal, but the narrators are all thiqat. With me? So that type of description of an isnad, it doesn't mean the hadith is sahih. It doesn't mean that the actual hadith is a tabi'i narrating upon the Prophet ﷺ, but everyone in the isnad that are mentioned, they're all thiqat.
Can you translate thiqat, please, Sheikh?
People are like people who trustworthy and of so thiqat, that they are thiqat trustworthy, and also that they are precise in their memory. A combination of both. Thiqat is a combination of two things. The person's adala is credible and trustworthy, upright, and the second, in his memory, also is precise. That the person, if a person have those two qualities, is said to be thiqa.
Is it thiqa or thiqa?
Thiqa, bitha. Where we're at? So we're saying that the example you might find at isnad, where the narrators are all thiqat, but the hadith is still mursal.
Why would that be, Sheikh?
Akam said that all the narrators in the isnad up to the tabi'i are mentioned, but the tabi'i narrate upon the Prophet Islam directly. Sa'id ibn Musayyib narrate upon the Prophet Islam. Or Nafi' who narrate upon Ibn Omar, he narrate upon the Prophet Islam. Ikrama, you understand? So they are skipping, they are narrating direct upon the Prophet Islam. We said norm, that is not the norm.
They're skipping the Sahaba.
They're skipping someone. Could be Sahaba, other than the Sahaba. That's the problem. We don't know if they're just skipping the Sahaba or others. Because the Tabi'in, they narrate amongst themselves, upon each other. So because we don't know exactly how many people are missing in the link, then it's considered to be, but because the last person in the isnad is a Tabi'i, then he's narrating upon the Prophet ﷺ, said to be mursal. But everyone else in the isnad before the tabi'i, they are known, and they are known to be thiqa. Then we said it's not, that they mentioned it's not hadithul mursal wa rawatuhu thiqat. Sometimes you have those things that are said and mentioned. So the next matter on hadith al-mursal, which now become the ulama discussed in usul al-fiqh, can hadith al-mursal be used as a hujjah, as a proof? Nam, can hadith mursal be used as a proof, as a evidence? So a hadith which is mursal, can we use as a evidence? So you find that majority of the fuqaha says yes. Majority of the fuqaha, these are the fuqaha and usuliyin, that they say can be used as an evidence, but with condition. But with condition. So they say in a condition that hadith, if it's said to be mursal, it still has some, it still have an incomplete chain, but if they put certain condition. If these conditions are met, they say it can be used as an evidence. So they have different evidence. They mentioned that in Anakuna Mursal, they consider a person, the narrator from the Sahaba, the Mursal, that he said to be one uthiqa. Also, the Isnad have to be thabit. Also, you find that if you might find other shawa'id, others who have narrated the same hadith, but with slight weakness, then that add to the strength. Also, they mentioned that you find that many of the ulama or other Sahaba is of that opinion that is mentioned in the hadith. They can be used. And it doesn't go against anything which is anything that doesn't contradict any of the usul of Islam. It's not contradicting any matter of Islam. Then I mentioned that a mursal then can be used in this case. With me? So for example, the hadith we have before, where it says, La dara wa la dirar. What I said in English is?
Do not
no harm and
do not harm.
Do not harm.
And do not be a cause of harm.
And do not be a cause of harm. So I said the hadith said if the hadith is mursal, because when you have all those different narrations, the narration of Abu Hurairah, Aisha, Ubadah, and all the other that were mentioned, that and Jabir, that they can give strength, those things give strength to it. And also, if you look at the hadith, it doesn't contradict any of the foundation of Islam. It more so support the principles of Islam. So based upon this, can be used as evidence because of the meaning is in line with Islam and with the other factors. So we mentioned that of the ulama who mentioned that hadith al-mursal, that Imam Shafi rahimahullah ta'ala, that of those who mentioned marasil, but they have criteria. If these things are conditions, if they're in place, then hadith al-mursal can be used as a hujjah, ihtijaj bi hadith al-mursal. So you have two things. Hadith mursal by way of, in hadith science, it's considered to be weak, but according to the usuliyin, it can be used as evidence with criteria and condition. Clear? So that's the thing with hadith al-mursal. So from two angles. The angle of, in the field of hadith, as to though they apply or they look to it as it is classed as a weak hadith, but also using as an evidence, according to the ulama of usul and the fuqaha, that I mentioned that hadith al-mursal, with condition, it can be used as an evidence. And I mentioned, so that's concerning that matter. And the early days regarding concerning the Sahab, the Tabi'een, that regarding concerning that Kibar Tabi'een, that time people were still known in general, Muslim environment was still known, were upon goodness. You understand? Later on, then people start to, you understand, a few things came up, but not the widespread, the general bountiful of people were upon goodness. Line wasn't widespread. You understand? So the Tabi'een, where people were known to be, in general, people were upon uprightness. You understand? So generally, there are people that are known to be people who are good. But said overall, with ilm al-hadith, it is considered to be da'if. With the fuqaha, it can be used with criteria and condition. So ihtijaj and is one matter, and hadith min haythu al-qabul wal-rad, by which it being authentic or not, then that's a next discussion. Two discussion. It being authentic or not, or it being used as an evidence, both are two discussions. Aywa. Let me discuss this and then, because I want to finish this bit and come back to that question. So the next matter we said that concerning the isnad to some extent. So they mentioned that lahu turuq yaqwa ba'du ahbad. We discuss that next time. As in ilm al-hadith, they will find certain hadith that, as we said, that if they have slight weaknesses, at times they can support each other, and that hadith that and strengthen each other, where they consider to be hasan. Maybe in the next lesson we can somewhat discuss that matter further, where at times it is applicable, it can be applied, that rule, and at times it is not applied. So I said, no, give an example of it not being applied. Could I give you? Yeah, you have Arba, yeah.
Yeah.
Which
This one.
hadith number? So at time we're going to not every case where a hadith of multiple narrations with weakness, they give strength to each other. We have the Arabic to this book. The first, I don't have the first. I'm in the second volume of my book. Was that? So generally concerned the book, when Nawawi rahimahullah ta'ala, he started the book, he mentioned that to proceed, then he stated, it has been narrated to us, an Ali ibn Abi Talib, Abdullah ibn Mas'ud, Muad ibn Jabal, Abu Darda, ibn Umar, ibn Abbas, Anas ibn Malik, Abu Hurairah, and Abu Sa'id al-Khudri, rata'ala anhum ajma'in, that he mentioned, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala be pleased with them, from many and various narrations that the Messenger of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, Man hafidha min ummati, man hafidha ala ummati, the one who have memorized, min ummati, or whoever from my ummah memorize, arba'in hadithan, 40 hadith, min amri diniha, from affairs of this religion, ba'athahu Allah yawm al-qiyamah min zumratil al-fuqaha al-ulama. That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the person who have memorized, anyone from this nation of mine that have memorized 40 hadith, then in matters relating to the deen, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala resurrect them on Yawm al-Qiyamah as being of the fuqaha and ulama. But this hadith mentioned that with all the narration, hadithun da'if. So the hadith about memorizing 40 hadith, hadithun da'if. But he mentioned all these companions who narrate the hadith. He mentioned Ali ibn Abi Talib, Abdullah ibn Mas'ud, Muad ibn Jabal, Abu Darda, Ibn Umar, Ibn Abbas, Anas ibn Malik, to the end. But with all of those different narrators, the hadith still doesn't elevate to acceptance. So not every hadith that have multiple narration that have weakness in them, not on all cases they're elevated to maqbool, to hasan. Not in all cases. So it's not a rule that every hadith that have multiple narrations or riwayat, that they'll give strength to each other. That's not a, so it's by case by case. It's case by case. In some instances, they may strengthen each other, and in some cases, they do not. Clear? Hassan is to be discussed next time. Okay? To be discussed next time. So in brief, so hadith, okay? Because I might not meet again. So hadith is of three categories. The division, hadith, maqbool, wa mardud. Hadith is said to be maqbool, meaning hadith it is of a level of acceptance. That level of acceptance, it falls into two categories. Hadithul sahih and hadithul hasan. So hadith hasan that we're discussing here, that have been mentioned, and hadith that is above it, hadithul sahih. They are considered to be the level of acceptance. Anything that is below it with hadithul da'if and whatever below that, then they are considered hadithul mardud. They are hadith that are rejected. Naam? So hadithul hasan is within the category of hadith maqbool. So meaning maqbool, they can be used to establish matters of the deen, where the matters are used as evidence in matters of aqidah, matters of fiqh, matters of suluk, matters of any matter pertaining to the deen. Hadith maqbool can be used as evidence. Clear? Hadith da'if, then that's the next discussion. So the next of the matter to discuss regarding this particular hadith is something regarding the rawi of the hadith, who is Abu Sa'id al-Khudri rata'ala anhu. So as he mentioned regarding concerning that the narrator of this hadith, that huwa Abu Sa'id is kunya, ismuhu Sa'd ibn Malik ibn Sinan Khazraji al-Ansari. Sa'd ibn Malik ibn Sinan al-Khazraji al-Ansari. Al-Khudri, so they mentioned that Abu Sa'id rata'ala anhuma, that he and his father are Sahabi. So his father also is a Sahabi. And his family are known to be a family like, people of respect. That is, people of, people of, I said nobility, are people, so his family were known to be people of respect from the community amongst from their tribe, and they're from the Ansar. So Khudra is like their Qabila, like their tribe. Khudra is from a Qabila from amongst the Ansar. So his father, Malik ibn Sinan, is a Sahabi, radiyallahu anhuma. So Malik ibn Sinan, his father, is also a Sahabi, and he died in the Battle of Uhud. So he was martyred in the Battle of Uhud, radiyallahu anhuma. Abu Sa'id anhu, that he mentioned that he didn't participate of those individuals that was young. So of those who approached the Prophet ﷺ regarding participating in the Battle of Uhud, but the Prophet ﷺ refused him because he was too young. So he wanted, Abu Sa'id al-Khudri wanted to participate in the Battle of Uhud, but the Prophet ﷺ refused him because he was too young. Then after his first battle they mentioned was Khandaq. His first battle was the Battle of Khandaq. And then after he participated in the battles that came after. They mentioned that it was known for his sabr ala ju' wal faqr. So Abu Sa'id al-Khudri was known for his sabr regarding his patience and endurance regarding al-ju', hunger, and also wal faqr. So at times he'll be hungry, and at times due to poverty, but he will be patient regarding those matters. So time that he would tie stone around to himself. He would think because of the hunger. He would tie a stone to his stomach because of the hunger. So he's of those people who experience that level of hunger and took those measures in trying to manage it. That also that he's considered to be of those people mentioned to know that of the ulama among the Sahaba, also Abu Sa'id al-Khudri, known to be of those who have narrated many of the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, of the top ones regarding of the narrators of hadith, and his hadith is found in the books of hadith in general. So his books of hadith are found amongst the books of hadith in general. Then he mentioned that he died, anhu, that he died in Medina, tawaffa bil Medina, that he died in Medina. Either sana, they mention ثلاثة أو أربعة أو خمسة, either 16, either the 53rd or the 63rd, 4th or 5th. So either 65, 63, 64 or 65 al-Hijri, that he died, and mentioned that he died at the age of over 94. He died at the age of 94 and was buried in Baqiyah. So he's buried in Baqiyah in Medina. So that's concerning something brief regarding As-Sahabi al-Jalil Abu Sa'id al-Khudri radiyallahu anhu. So that is inshallah, that's concerning that something regarding at-Takhrij and some regarding ilm al-Mustalah, regarding the hadith, as they use certain terms, which is hadithiyah. Then so they mentioned regarding concerning hadith that Ibn Rajab rahimahullah ta'ala mentioned that of those ulama who want the hadith to be authentic, that we have of those of authentic hadith, of the hadith bin Hassan, that they mentioned Hassanahu Nawawi, as mentioned here, بسبب الطرق, because of the different turuq wa shawahid. Also Ibn Rajab, when he mentioned what is said by Nawawi, mentioned وَهُوَ كَمَا قَالَ. So this is like he's mentioned, when he mentions statement of Nawawi regarding his ruling on the hadith, mentioned huwa kama qal, and it is as he has said. It is as he has said, showing his agreement regarding that judgment on the hadith being Hasan. Also Ibn Rajab rahimahullah ta'ala have mentioned regarding that Ahmed istadal bihada hadith. Also of those who have mentioned regarding that this hadith also authentic hadith, that I mentioned Ad-Daraqutni قال هذا حديث أسنده دارقطني من وجوه مجموعها يقوي الحديث ويحسن. And also Abu Amr ibn Salah. So you find of the ulama who all the hadith to be authentic. So that's concerning that particular. But also Ibn Hazm al-Zahiri mentioned, قال Ibn Hazm هذا خبر لا يصح. Regarding concerning this particular hadith, لا يصح. لأن إنما جاء مرسلا, because it had been narrated مرسلا. أو من طرق أو من طريق أو from path فيها زهير ibn Thabit وهو ضعيف إلا أن معناه صحيح. That they mentioned that over the hadith is that you have some weakness in the isnad, but overall its meaning is sahih. But we mentioned that not only but the ulama, also the hadith itself is also sahih. So that's concerning what is mentioned here inshallah ta'ala. And in the next lesson we'll continue from other matters pertaining to the hadith regarding mufradat al-hadith, regarding concerning the wording of the hadith, and also the meaning of the hadith, and the meaning of hadith, ijmalan wa tafsilan. So that will be of those things to be that we'll cover next in the next session of this a discussion regarding the hadith here, the hadith of Abu Sa'id al-Khudri radhiyallahu anhu. That just to bear in mind that if I find that, and there's a book or books that have been written regarding, I find that sunnah hadith that is da'if, but alayhi amal. So you might find sunnah hadith that they are by way of isnad, by way of the chain, and according to the criteria of the ulama of hadith, that hadith is considered to be da'if. With me? But the meaning and what the ruling that comes with it, it is acting upon. We'll find that majority of the ulama that they may have an ijma regarding acting upon the hadith based upon its meaning. But the hadith is da'if. So you have some even bahith, some research of, collected some hadith of that nature. Hadith where the isnad, the hadith is da'if, but it is still acted upon. The hadith is acted upon based upon its meaning, and also because the ulama have accepted the hadith as to what it contains, its meaning is in line with the Sharia, and you find some hadith of that nature. You have hadith of that type.
Next week comes on the following week.
So next session, inshallah ta'ala. So next session. So next week will be off, but we resume bi'idhnillahi ta'ala the week after. So that inshallah ta'ala will end today, and bi'idhnillahi ta'ala after 2 weeks we'll continue. وبالله تعالى توفيق وهذه إلى السبيل.
Sheikh, one of the hadiths be like, for example, reading Surah Al-Kahf on a Friday.
And not that wouldn't fall into that one. It wouldn't